Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Anna Rosenberg, and today we'll talk about public speaking confidence with our guest, Jim Smith. Co-founder of Better Presenter, Jim helps business professionals be more confident when they are, of course, presenting. With over 25 years of experience, he has coached hundreds of CEOs, presidents, and executives for media interviews, congressional testimony, press conferences, analyst meetings, and webinars. He has even had a first recently, coaching the father of the bride. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Well, thank you, Anna. It's so good to be with you today.
Let's start talking a little bit about the kind of people Better Presenter and you help.
Well, the type of people are usually highly motivated individuals who want to improve their presentation skills, and most of them are business professionals. So that would be the typical audience. And the idea of being motivated is something that everyone generally has some degree of a lack of confidence when they're speaking in public. And so that's really a critical area, and people realize that, and they want to find someone to be able to help them to develop those particular skills. So that's when I'm referring to highly motivated, that's a key component.
Well, you talk about our topic of today, which is confidence. What is confidence for you and to you?
Well, confidence it's an interesting point, really, in terms of what it really is owning specific skills that relate to speaking in front of a group and using those skills all the time. And as a result of that, you have repeated successes as you're presenting, and that's really how confidence grows. Part of the problem when people are presenting is that sometimes they feel, I did very well. Another time they say, I didn't do so well. And they never are able to quite figure out, why can't I consistently be at the top of my game? And so that's really by learning a specific set of skills, you're really practicing. And the more you practice by using the proper skills, the better you get, which results in being more confident.
I love that, because you're talking about successes and not success, right? Success is as a succession of successes. That's a great point.
That's it. And it's an interesting thing because of the fact that most people, what you'll hear them say is that I feel confident when I'm speaking one-on-one, but when I'm in front of a group, it's almost like it's not me up there. And so it's like my personality changes. That's what people say to me. And I generally talk to, and as our coaches from Better Presenter, talk to the individuals that we're going to be working with prior to the training. And you hear some amazing things, Anna. I was talking to somebody not long ago, and he was going to be coming in for one of our sessions, and he said, I can't sleep every Sunday night. And I said, well, tell me more about that. And he said, well, every Monday morning I have to present to the executive committee, and the chairman of the board is very direct in terms of his questioning. And he said, I can't get to sleep Sunday night thinking about how I'm going to do and what I'm going to do and what I'm going to do wrong and so on and so on. So, and this is a very, very successful individual in terms of his business, and yet he has little or no confidence when he's presenting. So that's the kind of thing that we change, and we change it very quickly.
Yeah, it is amazing that the level of quote-unquote success that we perceive in certain people sometimes doesn't translate into presenting or into speaking in public. They don't feel successful. Then I don't know what it is. What do you feel?
Well, it's a little bit like I was talking to one CEO about his presentation skills prior to working with them, and they said, I asked, what kind of talks are you generally giving? And they said, well, Jim, the only talks I give are the ones I can't get out of. So that becomes another phenomenon, which is the higher you go, you can often have someone else do the presentation for you, but that doesn't necessarily, that's not going to fix anything.
So the higher you go, the higher you can get sophisticated ways of hiding.
Correct. And,
okay.
And the higher you go, the higher the stakes are. In terms of you have to do an effective job. It's quite common to see someone make a presentation to security analysts and see the price of their stock change. Now, obviously, some of that is based on the content, but sometimes it's actually based on the level of confidence that the CFO or the CEO has when they're presenting the information in terms of their financial results and what they expect to happen in the future.
What do you feel are the biggest misconceptions about building public speaking confidence?
Well, the biggest misconceptions or myths are they're really two. One is that people think that if I just practice giving the presentation, I'm going to get better. And the other one is that I just need to get to know my material. And so it's kind of interesting. I use an analogy. It would be like if you go to a driving range, and I happen to play a lot of golf, and you'll watch people, and they're hitting balls on the driving range, and the balls are going everywhere. There's no pattern. The swing is not correct. And you see those same people doing that same thing week after week after week. And it's kind of the same way. If someone is just practicing presenting and they're not practicing the proper skills, then they're really just reinforcing bad behavior. And so that's the one big myth. So if you really have to be able to go to people who are experts to be able to get some specific coaching on what to work on. And I think content is the other thing, that people think that content is, if I just know my content, I'll be able to do an effective job. Well, we don't run into too many people that don't know their stuff when they're presenting. And there was some research that was done at UCLA where they took a look at where does impact come from when someone is presenting in front of a group of people. And they actually put it in terms of data. And they broke it down. 55% of the impact comes from how a person looks when they're up in front of a group presenting or on video. So in other words, they're what we traditionally call body language, the way they look and sound. So 55% comes from what we call the visual, 28% from the vocal, which is the voice, and only 7% of the impact comes from the verbal, which is the language or the words that the person is using. So that's a pretty big item there when you realize that the way we deliver the information is that it has a huge bearing on whether we have the type of level of impact that we have on an audience. So just memorizing or learning the words really is a very, very small component of having impact when you're in front of a group.
That's such an important distinction, right? Because we obsessed about the content and we are forgetting the important part.
Correct. Which is the delivery.
What are some of the little-known pitfalls that we have to avoid when trying to become powerful presenters?
Well, there's two that I would mention right now. The two are time and volume. And by time, what I'm referring to is when people get in front of a group to begin making a presentation or running a webinar, they suddenly have a blind spot with respect to time. In other words, elapsed time. And so they begin thinking, for example, that if I stop talking or I pause, that it's not going to look good to the audience. And so this then makes the problem even worse, because then they begin speaking more rapidly, and that starts to annoy the audience. And then oftentimes people start using what we call non-words, things like, and things that words, sometimes it's even a word, like somebody will be saying basically, and they'll say it 10 times in the course of 2 or 3 minutes. So we call those non-words, and that begins to annoy the audience, and it's strictly caused by the fact that the speaker is not in the moment in terms of understanding how much time I can stop talking in front of the audience, and I can think when I'm doing that. The other big problem has to do with volume. And because people spend so much of their, what we call speaking time, on the phone or in a one-on-one situation, they have difficulty projecting in front of a room. So in other words, what they think is increasing their volume to them feels like they're screaming, and no one wants to do that. So they go back to their traditional speaking voice, which is the way they sound on the phone, and you really can't do that in front of a live audience. You have to be able to get your volume up substantially to be able to create inflection in your voice. That's back to that 28% of the impact is coming from your voice. And if someone speaks in a monotone, they're not showing much confidence, and that affects the audience's ability to react to the information. So I would say those are the two big areas in terms of time and volume. You have a lot more time in front of an audience to stop talking, get your thoughts together, and connect to different people in the room.
What would you say is the number one fear of presenting? Why do we get so anxious about this thing?
Well, I think essentially it's the fear of failure or looking foolish. And no one wants to be able to do that, and that's why, time and again you see where they've done surveys, and there's even a bestseller called The Book of Lists, where they asked thousands of people, what are you most afraid of in life? And the number one fear in life, ahead of like flying or insects and bugs, the number one fear was speaking in front of a group. In fact, death was 7th on the list, Anna. So, as Jerry Seinfeld said in one of his episodes, he said, so if you went to a funeral, more people would wish they were in the casket than delivering the eulogy.
That was an epic joke. True.
That was supposed to be a laugh line there.
So let's leave the fears and obstacles and misconceptions for a second, and let's shift the conversation to possibility. How have you been able to help your clients?
Well, the way we are able to help our clients is allow them to be much more natural and to think more clearly when they are in front of groups of people. And so oftentimes some of the people we'll work with their engineers. And so they have a lot of technical information, or you have financial analysts that have a lot of data that they need to cover. So part of what we're working with them on is how to take the information that you've got, and rather than just spewing out a series of numbers or facts, you have to be able to put it into a story and into a fashion that it matches what the audience is looking for. And so sometimes that requires breaking some habits. And so where people people are used to just dumping information on people, almost like what you'd see in a memo, but they're doing it in a presentation, and that just is not holding people's interest, and the end result then they're not effective. So part of what we're doing is being able to improve their clarity. In fact, the two big things that we work on, and our motto is confidence and clarity in one day. And the clarity, obviously we've been talking a little bit about confidence, and that's an important role, but so is clarity. And some people just cannot get to the point, and they're unaware of that, or they're aware of it in some respects, but they don't know how to do that. And part of that is tied into the fact that when people get in front of a group and start presenting, they don't think as clearly as they normally do. They've got so many things running around in their head, and that they're not able to crystallize their thoughts and to be able to put them out in a concise fashion. So that requires practice, working on some of the skills that we teach, and that's a very, very important area, is the clarity side of it.
I see why you're so successful in the work that you do, because it's kind of that clarity is also an important factor, and that feeds back to the confidence too, I guess.
Absolutely. That's right. In fact, I had a funny experience years ago, and it was I had trained a young engineer in one of our classes with a very, very large automobile company in the United States. It was worldwide. And they had a special showing of one of their new vehicles in Chicago. And so they asked me to come over and observe what was going on with some of the presentations. And there were a lot of VIPs there. And so I looked over and got in the room, and there was a series of vehicles. It was at a big hotel, and a series of vehicles there. And I noticed this engineer over there that I had trained just a couple of weeks before that. And he was talking with the chairman of the board of the company. And he was explaining certain things about the vehicle, and he was very, very, the way he was coming across, he looked confident. He was using his hands and gesturing and things. And when he finished, the chairman of the board walked away, and the engineer spotted me, and he walked over toward me, and we shook hands. And he said, Jim, I couldn't have done that 2 weeks ago. And so that's an example of how when people can learn proper techniques in a short period of time, it can literally change their lives.
Yeah, and it's something that the skills they learn, they take with them forever, right?
Yes, and the forever is the key is that they have to practice them all the time, so that it's not skills that you're only going to use in public speaking situations. Some of the things you're going to need to do just in your day-to-day lives.
True, we speak there in public too, I guess.
That's right.
So it's excellent practice.
That's right. We're practicing, or we have an opportunity to practice all the time. And because we're using our voices, we should be looking people right in the eye and speaking to them. So there's a whole series of things that are things that we should be doing and make that the way we communicate.
I'm curious, what inspired you to become a public speaking coach and do the unique work that you do?
Well, I think it was a series of steps that just took place in my life. I went to college on a golf scholarship, and so I liked to play golf, and I was good at it. And one of the classes I took in college was a public speaking class, and I just dreaded taking this class. And I ended up actually enjoying it. And I thought, that's funny. I wouldn't have thought that I would actually like that. So that kind of stuck in the back of my mind. And ultimately, there was a very small company getting started, and the company was actually using videotape, which was relatively uncommon, using that in teaching public speaking. And so it was a series of little connections that I was able to do, and the other thing that was unusual about this company was, besides teaching public speaking, as a coach or an instructor, we were also involved in selling. And so I had some sales background, so it was a very interesting fit to be able to teach people skills, and you were also involved in selling, which obviously is involved in listening carefully to what people are looking for and then being able to tailor things, because our clients were very large corporations. And even though we were a small company, we were training and coaching CEOs of major corporations all over the world as we began to grow. So that was kind of an interesting, kind of the way my career evolved, and it's been fun.
I'm sure it has been fun. It sounds exciting to be working with so many different kinds of professionals and companies. Can you share with us a lesson about confidence that you learned early on and then that still has an impact on you today?
Well, I think the easiest, or the part that always stayed with me was I heard someone say years ago that we judge ourselves by our intentions and we judge other people by their behavior. And when you stop and think about that, that relates a lot to presenting in public, whether you're doing a webinar, a press conference, or a sales presentation, that everybody wants to look confident and knowledgeable when they're up in front of a group. But the group only can determine whether you're confident by your behavior, and that would be your body language, your voice, and to some degree your words. So that's what people have to really understand, and that has stayed with me for a long period of time, that confidence is really made up of these different components that we've been talking about, and that's what an audience is doing. They're watching the presenter, and they're determining, do they look and sound confident? And if they do, then that's going to lead to, and that's going to be a successful presentation. And there's a lot of talk lately, you'll hear people say that an audience doesn't really remember what you said, but they do remember how you made them feel about the topic. And so that component of how they feel about the topic is heavily influenced, as we saw before with those numbers, it's heavily influenced by how you look and sound up there. So that's a key component in terms of being successful.
That was a really generous distinction. Thank you for that. Now comes a difficult question. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What is your number one tip to build confidence? Not number 2, not number 3. We want number 1.
Number one tip to build confidence. I think the number one tip to build confidence is people need to connect with individuals in the audience and speak to specific people one at a time. We should not be trying to talk to the entire room of individuals. And so that's what people typically do, is they get in front of a group, and it's a group. It's not a series of individuals to them anymore. It's just a group. And so that leads people to not be connecting with individuals. And so in our day-to-day life, some people don't even look at people when they speak. And you see that. You'll see two people talking in a hallway, and one person is talking and he's looking at his shoes. And so you can only imagine what someone's eye contact is going to be like in front of a group if they can't do it on a one-on-one basis. So that's probably the biggest single item that people need to be aware of, is speaking to individuals in the audience rather than the group. That's where videotape comes in, by the way, because if you were to ask people, who were you looking at when you were giving that presentation, they would say, well, I was looking right at people. And then if you played the tape, you'd see that they were hardly ever looking at anybody. So that's where the videotape becomes a very important tool to be able to show people both what they shouldn't be doing as well as what they should be doing.
That's a great tip in itself, right? Like have some way of getting feedback of what you're doing and what you should be doing and not doing.
Well, yes, although videotape is an interesting tool, and as I said, we go way back with the use of it, and in many ways, videotape is misused as it's used by people for public speaking purposes, because if adults look at themselves on videotape, all they typically see are the things that they're doing wrong. And so the end result is that if they see all these things that they're doing wrong, they're hearing themselves say, those kinds of things, and the fidgeting. And if the person watching themselves on videotape does not have a fix or is not able to determine, which they generally can't do on their own, how they're going to correct that, then it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy that they're going to continue to do that, and then they're never going to watch themselves on videotape because it just makes the problem worse. So you have to use it as a constructive tool, and when it's used correctly, it can save lots of time. That's part of why we're able to do what we do in one day's time with small groups of people.
That was, of course, another very wise distinction, right? Not to use videotaping to punish yourself for everything that you think is horrible about you.
Right. Well, and the other thing you'll see people, some people that teach public speaking, they'll videotape a class, and then the entire class will watch the videotape. And you say to yourself, I can't think of anything any more ineffective than doing that, because the person, the audience has already seen it, so they don't need to watch it again. And then the person who was doing it feels embarrassed, and so anyway, there are certain things that make videotape a useful tool, and those are the things that we've learned how to use it very, very successfully, and makes the best use of people's time if you use it correctly.
You mentioned that when presenting in public, we should connect with the people in the audience. Let's talk about webinars. What do you find is the difference between presenting live or in front of an audience and a webinar? Because for obvious reasons, I cannot make eye contact with people on a webinar.
No, because as you say, you're not able to see them, but you're maybe using visuals. Typically, is what people are doing. And so we're back to those three V's: the visual, the vocal, and the verbal. So the visual is with respect to the presenter, you can't see them, but the vocal becomes very important because your voice has to be energized. You have to be using lots of inflection, and so that's something that people can practice and learn how to use their voices more effectively, particularly in the area of volume, which we touched on that a little while ago, about speaking up and projecting your voice. And I think the other thing with webinars that is a kind of an unusual piece is that when we're using these visuals in front of the audience, we have to use them in a fashion that the audience understands what they're looking at. And so that's a whole other area that it's kind of an area within the realm of public speaking, where now you've got certain things that relate to, like when you're standing up in front of a group, there are certain skills you need there. The skills get adapted to when you're sitting down with a group. And yet again, the skills get adapted to when you're doing a webinar where they can't see you. So you have to be able to manage things in a more efficient factor, particularly when you're using PowerPoint and things like that. with a webinar. So that's a key component there, is being able to explain to the audience what they're looking at when they see a visual in a webinar, for example. And oftentimes people put whole paragraphs of material on there, and they think this is in some way going to communicate some important topic, and it's boring. And so we have to be able to improve the quality of our visuals so that they have the material on them, but we're not putting it in all paragraph form of bullets, 12 bullet points on a visual and so on. So there's a connectivity between the presenter and their visual that's particularly important. It's important in a live audience, but it's even more important in a webinar situation.
That was great. It makes a lot of sense. If it's a webinar, we have to compensate for what's missing from the live experience with the voice and with the visuals. Makes a lot of sense.
Right. Now, that's also because we're seeing, this has been going on for years with companies becoming more and more international, companies operating all over the world. You've got people with different languages that are out in the audiences. So you've got to be able to, with respect to a webinar or even a live presentation, but the idea of the visual aid becomes important because you can communicate concepts even when people are speaking and understanding different languages, and the visuals can become a common point of understanding. But again, the person has to know how to use them properly in front of a room and in a webinar situation.
So true.
I moved over with my family. We lived in England for a number of years and taught programs and seminars and coached people all over Europe and different parts of the world, but particularly in Europe. And it was fascinating to watch the difference in terms of almost like not cultural differences, but how people could connect and understand the skills that we were teaching, and it actually improved their ability to be able to present, in often cases in English, when English was not their native language, because they were able to slow down and think more clearly in front of groups of people and on webinars. So it was interesting to see that was almost like a benefit that we didn't even know was occurring, and it was in terms of the language.
That's a terrific point, because if somebody is listening and thinking, oh my God, I will never be confident because English is my second language and not my first one, there is hope. Actually, they have an advantage they didn't know they had.
Well, particularly when people realize that they can slow down, and oftentimes when people are speaking in let's say the listeners are listening and they're trying to translate it back and forth, and if the speaker slows down a little bit, it has much more impact then, and it helps the speaker to be able to come up with their next thought, even though they may be thinking in another language as well. So it's a very interesting phenomenon that goes on, and I give people a lot of credit when they have to speak in another language, and it's because I only speak English. I speak a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of a few languages, but I really marvel at people's ability to can speak even several languages and do it effectively in front of a group. It's a real, it's something to be very proud of, to be able to do that.
That's a great point. How can someone find out more about Jim Smith and Better Presenter?
The best way to find out about Better Presenter would be to go to our website, which is betterpresenter.com, and there you can find out about the different types of classes that we offer, who are some of our clients, and we have different types of seminars. We do public seminars, which is a relatively small part of our business. We do them in Southern California, and then we do the largest part of our business is doing either private coaching or small company groups where we work with no more than 6 people in a class, and we schedule those at the company location. find that out at our website, www.betterpresenter.com.
And that's a perfect note to complete our interview today. Till next time, remember, your awesomeness is portable. You can take it with you anywhere.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.